It's very. I'll put this in then.
Charlie, thank you. Charlie, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to the first Angevin talk of 2024, and welcome to all who are watching in America, Canada, Australia, and South Africa live. I would also like to thank all the heads of house and guests from other colleges and choirs who are joining us in person this evening in the storied room at the President's Lodge at Queen's. This evening, I am honored and delighted to introduce our very special guest, one of classical music's biggest stars, and a world-renowned violin virtuoso. He studied music right here in Cambridge at Girton College, keeping his education very broad, and studied music from a historical perspective. He then went on to the Royal College of Music in London to study the violin, with his first concerto with an orchestra at the age of 15, and playing with the London Philharmonic at 18. He has moved on to appear with the world's finest orchestras, conductors, and chamber ensembles. A philanthropist and passionate about giving back, he is ambassador for the Prince's Trust and a professor at Leeds College of Music. Please join me to welcome Charlie Siem.
Thank you. Thank you.
Charlie, welcome.
Thank you.
A huge thank you for joining us. And thank you for flying in from France to join us.
It's my pleasure. It's amazing to be here. It's,
thank you.
Such a sumptuous spot.
Thank you. So you were born to a Norwegian father
yeah.
and a shipping investor, and a British American mother.
British, really, born in South Africa, but moved to England when she was about 9.
Had I known she was in South Africa, I would have invited you here a lot earlier.
No, that's it. You have something in common with her there. That's right. Exactly.
Your real name is actually incredible. Charles Maximilian Siem. Wow. Was there any chance of you having a Norwegian name?
I know. My dad wanted to call me Norman. In Norwegian, that's a very strong name than Man of the North, But my mother wasn't sure it sounded as good in English. So they went for Charlie. Yeah, exactly.
Where did this all start for you? What is your earliest memory?
I remember my mum is not a musician, nor is my father, but she definitely encouraged the arts, and including music, more the visual arts than music, actually. But that's what I gravitated towards. So she put tape cassettes in her car when we sort of drove around, and she had this sort of box set of Yehudi Menuhin playing violin concertos and all kinds of things. And that's how I first heard the violin. And I guess, it's a very kind of organic. It's not like I suddenly had a light bulb moment and I knew exactly what I was going to do. As I guess many things in life, it was a very slow process, but I first sort of noticed the violin and music, I guess, through the lens of the violin, and then I started pursuing it, and slowly sort of, step by step, becoming more and more passionate, I suppose, or obsessional, as one has to be with an instrument like the violin.
Did you ever feel pressure growing up to follow in your father or mother's footsteps? They're both very successful in their own life.
No. My father's very kind of geared in this sort of, kind of the Norwegian tradition of shipping. It's obviously got a big history of that, and that was important to him. But he didn't necessarily, share, as I was growing up anyway, so much about his professional life. So it wasn't at the forefront of my mind. I think it was his philosophy, which I'm very glad, I'm very glad it was his philosophy, was that, his children should find what they are interested in, and they should pursue that without any kind of pressure, to kind of conform to anything else, which is why music and the violin, which was completely off-center as far as he was concerned. He was not by any means a kind of great music lover or anything. He's become one as a result of me, but he was very supportive and very sort of happy for me to try and find my own pathway and my own kind of challenges. And yeah, I'm very glad that he had that.
Well, it's a lesson for all of us as parents to let children.
Well, it's a difficult one, I think,
passion.
because obviously you know, I mean, I guess he perhaps was very consumed with what he was doing, and he was very, you know, I guess maybe trusting of my mum, who was obviously the arts played a sort of predominant role in her mind. But yeah, I suppose as a parent, you think you know best, but maybe you don't. Yeah.
If you don't mind my sharing, you've just had your first baby daughter.
That's right.
So congratulations.
Almost 3-month-old girl. Yeah. Baby girl. Very much, yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and quote you, if I may. Every time you play a piece, even if it's the same, it never comes out identically. Music is defined by abstraction because there is the aspect of time one has to inhabit. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I think you know, being a performing artist of any kind is you know, you have to kind of reinvent yourself every time you go on stage, and whether or not you're playing the same piece or not is a completely different scenario. And you, as a human being, are bringing whatever you have on that day to that moment. The audience is doing just the same, and the space that you're in, which is part of the instrument, the acoustic, you know, the sort of collaborator with the instrument is very much the space that surrounds it. So it is a completely unknown adventure every time you perform, which is why it's such a kind of fascinating and kind of thrilling thing to do, because you enter the unknown whenever you start the first note.
Have you felt the difference between one performance of the same thing and another?
Totally. I mean, they're always different. I mean, I could never replicate one performance to another, even if I felt I'd done a real justice to my ability and to the music that I was interpreting. And I thought, God, this is really pretty much as good as I could do it. I would never be able to. And thank God, because I would have, you know, then I'd be a robot in some way. But it is that kind of undulating journey between, you know, disappointment and kind of struggling to feeling you've done some sort of justice to what you're able to do, that keeps it exciting, keeps it kind of and challenging. That's the point. It has to be a challenge one way or another.
The pressure of performing is really immense. How do you personally handle that? Do you still get nervous?
Yeah, definitely. And again, it's very unexpected when, you know, adrenaline can hit you. And I think that's, you know, again, it's a journey of discovery. It certainly has been for me. And it's not something you can pin down. That's, I guess, the only lesson I've learned. There's no ritual. There's no way of controlling an environment. And obviously, if you have 10 concerts in a row and you're very well conditioned, you know, you see the stage in a very different way, and it'll obviously be easier to kind of just walk through it. But if you've had a bit of time away from the stage, you really don't know how your body's going to respond. And so I think that lack of expectation is the only rule that I have. To always know that it's a challenge and never take that for granted, because I've had many experiences where I thought I was absolutely, you know, I knew what I was playing very well, and I felt, you know, and then you get completely you know, wave hits you in the middle of the performance. So the key is a kind of humility, I guess, for the stage, that you always have to prepare as kind of rigorously as you can, and then to give yourself up to the moment. You can't control it. You can't necessarily have a complete kind of map of how you're going to perform a piece, and that sense of expectation has to be put outside the door, because it's that expectation that kind of ruins your relationship with that present moment.
Takes a lot of trust.
Yeah, well, again, I think it's once you have no expectation, it makes things easier, and then you don't have to be necessarily even trusting or need, because you don't need so much from the moment, apart from just being there and just allowing yourself to kind of adapt to that environment.
So what does a typical day look for you? So obviously you're either in performance mode or sort of living your daily life.
Yeah.
What does life look like?
Well, no, I mean, it's again, the career of a musician, I guess, in general, certainly my experience has been, it goes through periods of you can be periods where you're playing often, traveling a lot, and then you're kind of completely consumed by what you're doing. You don't have much of a life outside of that. And then you have periods when you're not doing much at all. Certainly since COVID came, my life changed completely. And I got married, I had a child, and I stopped working with the manager that I'd had previously. So I wasn't playing as much. And so my daily life became very sort of rewarding, actually, but it was a kind of routine that was very satisfying, staying in one place, doing the same thing every day, incorporating obviously my practice, but then other things, that I like to do, reading, exercising, whatever it might be, but very sort of simple routine. But then when the concerts come, then it's a different routine, obviously, because you're traveling and then you're preparing, you're rehearsing with an orchestra, if it's a concerto, you're working with your pianist or a chamber group, or whatever it might be. So yeah, life can sort of be turned upside down.
I think there seems to be a real athletic discipline too, because you're misaligned when you're playing violin. It's the most unforgiving instrument, and then you have to sort of realign your body.
No, exactly. I mean, everyone develops their own way. The violin is asymmetrical, and it obviously is very kind of heavily, weighted towards the left side more than anything else. So it can be quite contorted. And then, many people find ways of playing to sort of even it out, and some people are more, contorted, than others. But it's a very personal thing that one has, the relationship with the instrument. And you sort of find that for yourself.
So you move your audiences immeasurably. I have to say, preparing for today has been a real privilege for me. As I love the violin, I love the classical music, and it was really a journey, a really beautiful journey. So thank you for that from me. But it's the very essence, the way you move your audiences, who you are. How do you do that? How does that expression move over to your audience? And how do you relate and let the music sort of do its thing?
I mean, I think probably by not considering the impact that you might be having at all. I think by not being involved, I think to have an authentic relationship with the music that you're playing, and to find something that's particular to you in the music. So obviously, if you're interpreting, works from this great kind of canon that many other people have already interpreted brilliantly, and people are right now, amazingly talented people. Right. The key is that you have to find some personal connection, because obviously an audience is responding to something human ultimately. It's not about finding the most accurate player that's going to be the most convincing necessarily. And so I feel if you feel moved as a performer by what you're playing, even maybe it's part of the music, might not even be all of it, and then you really focus on that, that's all you're really bringing to the table. And then if you have absolutely, you don't need to be desperately trying to convince an audience of your feeling for the music. You just bring that kind of authenticity, that kind of sincere feeling for what you're doing. Then I think it's a rewarding experience, certainly for me. And whether or not it resonates with the audience is beyond my control. And I think if you start focusing too much on how, because again, I've had so many different experiences. I've had audiences that obviously have not responded, and I felt kind of a complete, and it's just not quite worked. And I've had experiences when I felt the audience was really with me, and that's a wonderful feeling. But you can't be too attached to how the audience responds necessarily, or else you're not going to end up being as powerful as a sort of kind of individual performer, because you're giving too much of your energy off to something that again is beyond your control in the first place.
You've got to let it do.
Exactly. You have to really focus on your kind of whirlwind of energy. Yeah.
So, what is success to you? If you look back on your life, and as you look at it in motion now, you're at the top of your game.
I hope I'm not, to be honest. I mean, I feel that where I'm going. I think the key, I guess, or a feeling of success to me is the feeling that I am going somewhere that feels rewarding or meaningful. The idea that I would have done something that I feel defines me at this phase of my life is definitely not how I feel.
I understand.
But I feel the sense that I've got some purpose, some sort of somewhere to work towards, a way of becoming a more kind of effective communicator of the music that I love, being able to share that with more people, having a pathway to do that, that feels like a sense of success because I feel I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And that is related more to the future than it is to the past and present, I guess. So I guess that's my idea of success is feeling I've got this sort of yellow brick road ahead of me. But I don't feel necessarily that I've realized my, dreams, or not dreams again, because then I have to be specific about what those dreams are, but I feel it's that energy moving forward that is important.
You still have a lot to do.
Yeah, hopefully. I hope so. Yeah.
So what is your philosophy to performance? I've heard you say you need to commit to a performance.
Yeah.
So how do you explain that to us?
Well, it kind of, carries on from what I was saying before. I guess it's a commitment almost to letting go, I suppose. Right. Commitment gives the sort of almost kind of a rigid sort of box to an idea in some way. But I feel it's more commitment to a philosophy, which is lack of expectation and acceptance of the moment that you're in, and the fact that you can't define that by experiences you've had before or ideas of what you think you can do. The moment is what it is, and you will respond in exactly the way that you're supposed to.
So how do you translate that then to the rest of your life? How do you apply that feeling or that knowledge or that way of being?
Yeah, I wish I was better at translating, because I think one of the great things about my experience of playing the violin and sort of developing some sort of a career for myself in the sort of music world is that you learn these incredible sort of lessons of life, or learning, about your own kind of limitations and about the possibility of expanding those boundaries within yourself. But then, and that can apply really to everything to a certain extent. But I don't know that I'm always that good at doing that. It's a kind of particular muscle that is channeled into the violin, the concept of going on stage.
So you've worked with incredible conductors, pianists. What is that energy in that relationship, and how does that inspire you? How does that work or not work generally with all these very talented people?
Well, I think music is a completely collaborative art form, and without being with other musicians, whether they be great musicians or whether they be peers of yours, you're never going to progress. I mean, that's why chamber music, whether you're playing trios, quartets, quintets, is always said to be the most beneficial, aspect of being an instrumentalist, because you just learn so much about the sort of construction of music and how to express it and how to sort of find your place within the sort of community of a group, because you're really using the language of music to sort of speak with each other. So you learn the most from being, and conductors are a very important part of any kind of soloist's life, because you get to know the repertoire that you play with an orchestra through them, their wisdom, their experience, their wealth of knowledge, having worked with so many other, in my case, violinists, and the same with piano. I have this a great pianist that I work with often, Itamar Golan, who has worked with the absolute sort of icons, violinists that I sort of grew up listening to and admiring, enormously. And so to be able to work with him on the same sort of repertoire is a huge privilege. And again, it's always finding more to sort of say and express in this repertoire. So yeah, it's an essential part of developing as an artist is collaborating, working with people, who have a broader understanding than you do. Yeah.
And just watching him play, I mean, a phenomenal talent, and he's always just zoned into So, for you being, younger than him, how does he sort of generate or instill or impart, his greatness to you? Where's the growth for you with that person?
Well, again, I mean, I first met him when I was a teenager and sort of did masterclasses with him, and then when I I had a recital at the Wigmore Hall when I was in my early 20s. I asked if he would do it with me, kind of nervously, sort of hoping he'd say yes. And he did. And then from then on, we started playing together. And he's become a very close friend of mine. But again, just has so much more experience than I do with all of this standard violin repertoire. So I have so much to kind of learn from his years of playing on stage with countless incredible violinists. So as much as I just love traveling around with him as well, because that's also an important part of it. If you're going to be going to various places and you're sort of sitting around hotels on your own, if you have a pianist that you actually love being with and you love sort of chatting to, that adds a dimension.
Absolutely.
But obviously also for my own musical development, he's a great inspiration.
They always say to get to know a person and who they are, you have to travel with them.
Yeah, that's true.
So it can be very negative or very positive.
Yeah, no, with him, actually, I've had some weird experience. He gets lost, he goes missing at times, and he can be quite kind of wild and a bit sort of irrational compared to my more kind of like steady way of doing things, but which has been irritating at times. But I'm in awe of him, so I forgive him every time.
So your grandmother is the adorable Edna Morose.
Yeah.
So she's 93.
93, yeah.
She has her own Instagram account called Edna's Choice.
Yeah.
So, and I understand her grandchildren do, and you yourself help her curate that.
I said it was the first lockdown in COVID. I lived with my grandparents there. I'd played a concert in Beirut, of all places. I was playing the Beethoven Violin Concerto, and I came back, and then the COVID was beginning, and I thought, well, where on earth will I go? And I went. They have a house in south of France, so I moved in with them, and the three of us ended up staying together for 3.5 months. And so my grandmother had been an actress when she started her career, and a long time ago, and she has a great love of poetry. She'd had some radio channel in the sort of when my mum was a small child, where she read poetry every Sunday at a certain time. And so I said, why don't you use today's social media, this sort of channel, to to sort of share this your wonderful nature and your love of poetry, and you speak it so beautifully. So we set this up, and it seems to have done very well. People respond so well to her. Yeah.
She seems such an adorable and really remarkable
She is actually, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm obviously very biased, but I feel she is. She's an amazing lady.
So, what do you attribute her energy and longevity? I mean, she's 93 now.
Yeah.
Is it a state of mind? She seems incredibly active and smart and just very centered. What would you?
I mean, she's obviously definitely incredibly lucky to have genes, or that allowed her to be healthy basically for this long, and to live with a high quality of life, right up until now. And that's partly, I guess, luck in the physical sense, but it is also her mindset, which is very level-headed, very kind of. I've never heard her say a negative thing about anyone, or she's always got a very sort of generous perspective, a generous kind of outlook, and I think that sort of
a wonderful energy.
That kindness and that sense of kind of giving people the benefit of the doubt has an effect on your sort of physical state as much as anything else. So I definitely have a lot to learn from her in that sense, because I can get very irritated, and I can but it's a personality thing.
It's a gift.
It's a gift, I guess. Yeah, it is actually.
Yeah, it's right. I mean, it's wonderful.
Yeah, no, she's an amazing lady.
Well, I particularly enjoy. I think she comes on Sunday where she reads the poem, and then she invites you as her guest.
every now and again, she'll say, "Do you think you can play something?" To kind of, and which is always a pleasure. Yeah, so long may it last.
You debuted your album Beethoven Violin Concerto and the Two Romances in G and F major. It was performed with the Philharmonia Orchestra from Florence and conducted by in London, conducted by Oleg Katani, who I know is your good friend.
Great friend, yeah.
So you did 5 tracks, and the album is one of your most ambitious, you say, and challenging works as yet. how did that come about? And, you know,
Well, the
tell
Beethoven
us.
violin concerto is probably the most challenging violin concerto to play. Not necessarily because it's technically, and it is technically very demanding, but it has such a kind of weight of musical substance, that to kind of have something to say, or to be able to let the notes kind of flow through you in a kind of purely unaffected way is very difficult. It's like playing Bach is the same. It's hard to sort of get the balance between not interfering too much but having enough character to sort of deliver the music. And Beethoven to me was like this great sort of biblical kind of text that I kind of inspired me to really pursue the violin as a child. Yeah. I was so kind of moved by it. And I guess it was something that I would never have considered recording. And I didn't perform it for the first time until not that long ago, even sort of 5 or 6 years ago. Right. But I just got to a place where I realized that I'll never really make progress to sort of get better at playing it unless I perform it, record it, and just engage with it. So, and it was, my sort of previous manager, who's the wife of Oleg, she sort of encouraged me and said, you should just record it, even though it seems absolute kind of the final thing you'd ever want to record. If you don't do, you won't develop that relationship with it if you don't go for it. And so I worked on it with Oleg, and he had some great ideas, for me, more technical sort of bowing and sort of various tempi, slightly sort of faster tempi for it, and it was a great sort of challenge. And I hope to get the chance to record it again, so I can improve on what I did. But yeah, it was definitely a great moment to attempt it.
Oh, that's wonderful. So, do you feel that was your sort of the height of your Beethoven relationship per se, getting there?
I hope it'll get much higher. I mean, I feel it's a kind of beginning of that journey. It was a sort of a starting point more than anything else. Yeah,
that's absolutely wonderful. So your violin, which you've absolutely kindly
it's much more interesting than I am, so that's why I had to bring it.
It's and I hope I'm saying this correctly, it's the Guarneri del Gesù, or called Degville.
Yeah, so Giuseppe Guarnerius was a violin maker alongside Stradivari. He was a bit younger than Stradivarius, in Cremona in the early 18th century. And he made far fewer instruments than Stradivarius because he lived half as long. And he was a bit of a sort of strange, quite wild character. And his style of making became quite erratic before he died. Quite unsymmetrical and sort of very sort of flamboyant scrolls. One of the way you judge these instruments is the scroll at the top of the neck of the violin. This was from 1730. It was made in 1735, and which was at its most kind of elegant, its most Stradivarius style. So it's a very, I should try and so people can see it more. But it's a beautifully, it's almost a perfect example of him trying to be as good a violin maker as he can be. And, he died 10 years after he made this violin, but the violins he made from the 1740s, 1745, Paganini played on one of them. Lots of great violinists had violins from that period. They are not as perfect looking at all, but he was famous for those wild, bizarre looking violins. But this, is my great friend, Degville, Louis Degville. They all have names, the great violins, some of them more kind of arbitrary than others. But Louis Degville was a collector in London in the sort of 1850s, and he owned this violin, and it's kept his name. But it was played by Yehudi Menuhin in the 60s for a number of years.
Wonderful.
And it was Prince Wilhelm of Prussia. He owned it in the 1890s. And
so how did you come to acquire it?
So it's owned by a foundation that let me play it, basically. And so, very fortunate to have it for a period.
And then, so your first time playing it, did this feel like belongs to you? How did you choose that?
I think one probably imagines that, you go and you look for your favorite violin and you just get it, but it doesn't really work that way, because obviously these violins are now so unbelievably expensive and hard to come by. So if you have the opportunity to play on a Grenada del Gesù, because of the tradition, because of the history, whether or not you respond to the instrument initially, you take it. And that was really the point with this violin. I had the opportunity to play on this violin, and in many ways I found it quite challenging to play on it. It wasn't a sort of completely easy fit, but to have something in your hands that is, so distinguished and so kind of immersed in history is an amazing thing. It's quite
I don't know if this is the right terminology, but you do have to create a relationship with it.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes time, and it has to resonate with you, and you've got to, I assume, get really used to how it is, and does it sort of feel good for you?
No, absolutely. And it's a relationship with a violin, almost like with a human being, because they can be temperamental, and they respond to their environment. They respond to things that we might, can't, specify necessarily. But when it works, it's a wonderful thing. Yeah.
Well, thank you for bringing it. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. No, I'm not sure if everyone can see it very well here. So sorry,
good.
only people at the front, but I'll leave it on the table so people can.
Well, I wouldn't really ask you to maybe show us.
I must play something. No, I will. Absolutely. No, I must play something.
Would you like to do it right now?
Yeah.
We'd be delighted.
I'll take this off because otherwise it'll be.
Thank you.
There we go. Shall I just put it in? Thank you.
Charlie, thank you. This is really special. We're amazing.
I'm going to play a piece by Eugène Ysaÿe, who's a great Belgian virtuoso violinist. He wrote 6 solo sonatas in response to Bach's great sonatas and partitas, a sort of 20th century response to that great work. And this is the 3rd from the collection.
Whoa!
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Wow, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Charlie, thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank
for
you
having
very,
me.
very
Yeah.
much. If it's okay with you, could we spend a few minutes on a Q&A?
Absolutely.
I will have
yeah.
all of our guests here, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. Please, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
My husband is a violinist.
Right.
He was a violinist and loved the essay that you played now.
Yeah.
And when my daughter was a baby, she used to wind herself around his feet while he played.
Yeah.
And she took up the violin at around 2.5.
Yeah.
And carried on playing. And I'm wondering now, you have a daughter.
Yeah.
I'm going to encourage that.
It's a very good question. I mean, I'm very curious because people always say, so how does your daughter respond to music? And obviously, she's had violin practice and music in general, because we listen to music at home since she was in my wife's belly and the few months that she's been out in the open air. But for now, I can't see necessarily whether she engages and how she responds to it. And the question obviously is to what extent I will encourage it. But I think it's one of those things that's very much at the forefront of her reality. It will be growing up. And it'll be up to her whether she reaches out for it. Because I know from my own experience of having very much reached out for it, it wasn't presented to me in any way. It made me feel like I kind of owned it, and it sort of added such a dimension in my life as a result. Whereas I feel if you have a parent that is a musician and then is also kind of encouraging, it feels, unless they are so, sort of predisposed to doing it, it can be a turn off, which I wouldn't want it to be if she did have the desire and the sort of potential to sort of play music, in one way or another. So we'll see. I'm anxious to see. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Please go ahead.
A question about populism. You've talked, I think, very clearly about kind of the music being with you and you just building a relationship with the music. And that, and in the end, the audience will get what the audience gets.
Yeah.
there's clearly another strand of thinking.
Yeah.
Developing where people are building, putting very glamorous covers on their albums. Big social media presence.
Definitely.
I mean, very engaged with the audience. Actually, to the point of actually talking to the audience quite a lot in concert. I mean, how do you feel about? That's a very different approach to what you talk.
True, but I think that's important. I think image and the way you present yourself, and I'm as aware of that as other artists in many ways, I think is unavoidable. And it's not even just unique to today's world with social media. If you look at a lot of the great artists in the 19th century, they had something particular about them and their stage presence, and that was important. But I feel in the actual delivery of the music and the preparation of, I think the sort of communicating your brand or whatever it is you're sort of selling, tickets for people to come see it, is a separate thing to the actual sort of substance of what you're delivering. I think the process of preparing that and then going on stage and actually sort of sharing that is in many ways kind of self-contained, and it should be. If you think too much about how the audience will respond or what they might expect from you, then you dilute the kind of essence of what you have. But I think being aware of how you present yourself to have the opportunities to go on stage in the first place, that is obviously a slightly kind of self-conscious and kind of slightly more irritating side of the job, but that has to be faced. But it is a completely separate sort of part and should be unrelated to the actual substance of the music making and delivering the music itself.
Question. Hi.
Thank you for the performance. I was wondering so you said that in order to perform a piece, you feel like you have to engage with it at a more personal level. What is the process, and if it's happened, of not engaging with it?
Really good question, actually. I find that a lot of the time, obviously, I choose the music that I play, so I have something within me that responds to the music. But then a lot of the time, I would be asked to play, and in particular, contemporary music, which I didn't necessarily gravitate towards initially. But then I've been asked when I played in festivals, they'll have a contemporary composer having written something, and I'd be asked to play, a trio for a contemporary piece, or something. There's a double violin concerto that I did, and I'd always be very resistant at first. But then I always had a feeling that the challenge of doing something that isn't quite up my street has to be taken on board. And then I expect it'll be a sort of job of work somehow, because I'll just be playing the notes and getting through it. But I found each time I did it, I found something in those pieces that initially, when I looked at the music and I sort of tried it, I felt, God, this is so dry and I can't see anything that's going to really be moving, to me. But then the more I sort of work on it, the more I sort of get to know the music, I inevitably find, I think there is, as kind of banal as it sounds, there really is something in almost everything, and if somebody's taking the time, obviously maybe not absolutely everything, if something is just a terrible piece, then it's terrible. But if somebody is a talented composer and they've taken the time and they've invested in writing something, there's obviously going to be something that you can find that connects with you. And I've been surprised time and time again, especially by contemporary music, that I do have that connection. And which is really an amazing kind of discovery each time.
Charlie, because you are fundamentally a purist.
In the sense that? In
the music and what you like. And, yeah.
Purist in the sense that I like a particular sort of repertoire.
Yeah.
And a kind of,
Yeah, the greats.
Well, yeah, but there are greats in the contemporary. I think that, perhaps I'm regressive, I sort of I'm looking back thanks to all these great, musicologists that have idealized all of these, composers from the past. Who knows what will be produced from, our time and how it will be, perceived in the future. But yeah, I'm a little bit kind of backwards in that sense. But purist sounds better than backwards. So.
James.
I was actually going to ask more or less this. I mean, you studied here, you've been studying history of music. You've got a very sense, you've been talking about the history of your violin and the history. How important is this sense of being in a long tradition and knowing about the history of the things you play?
I mean, I think that the violin world in particular is a complete tradition. I mean, it's a lineage more than anything else, and it's a sort of it's an oral tradition as much as anything else. The great teachers, that you can sort of connect history, but history becomes condensed very quickly in the violin world. You go right back beyond his eyes, Paganini, in a few sort of handshakes of teacher and student. And so you feel that's one of the beauties of it, which actually fascinated me as I sort of entered that world and sort of, started to learn about it and sort of become part of it, was this amazing sort of connection with history and a lineage of violin sort of development through certainly the last 200 years becomes a very small time period. And then your sort of concept of history outside of the violin is affected by that. You realize that is sort of human history as much as anything else. And so your sort of the way you approach the violin, the way you approach the repertoire, you're communicating with teachers from more than 100 years ago. Every time you open up a score, it's been edited by who by or Guertin or something like that. And that to me is a fascinating thing to understand the tradition and to have all these amazing anecdotes. And there's one Paganini's 24th Caprice, which is the last in the great sort of book of caprices that sort of redefined violin playing. There's an amazing story. It was a letter written by Hubay, who's a great Hungarian violinist, remembering a lesson he had with Henri Guertin, the great Belgian violinist, who also wrote many great works for the violin, 5 violin concerti, amongst other things. And he said, I came to the great master in Algiers in the 1888 or something, to play as a young student the 24th Caprice and learn it from him. And he told me that he remembered as a young boy himself in the 1830s in London, he was being brought out as a child prodigy in a house, in a salon concert in London. And no one was that interested in him because Paganini himself was there and he was going to perform. And then he recounted to Hubay, who then wrote it down in the 1930s in this letter, how he observed Paganini, who obviously there's no recorded material of Paganini, play each variation with the most kind of elaborate description of, the staccato was like pearls falling on a glass mirror, and all this sort of thing. And it's these sorts of things that make it that much more colourful and exciting, the world of the violin and this sort of long sort of thread of tradition that kind of reaches back into the past. So now I'm fascinated by that. Yeah.
That's why Anna does these in the storeroom.
No, exactly. That's true. Exactly, it makes sense.
That's where James hides the paintings.
Yeah.
I thought, please go ahead. Thank you.
This may or may not have been your experience, but I think one way of describing a Cambridge muso's life is that there's a lot of spontaneity. I wondered where you find spontaneity in music now.
Yeah.
And also perhaps what you feel you've sacrificed musically in pursuing a career.
In what sense, in terms of sacrifice musically?
Well, are there things that you don't or can't do now?
Yeah.
That you might have done.
That's a good, interesting question.
Something else.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess I get my way of being is that I just don't imagine what some people said, with your childhood being so invested in the violin, did you miss out on other aspects of, growing up and, socializing more, I think. But my sort of way of seeing my life and sort of the way it sort of panned out is that was exactly the way it was supposed to be for me. And so I find myself here and I think, what can I do next that would be more rewarding than I've, whatever I've already done. So I don't, I feel there's many more things that I would like to explore going ahead in terms of music. And a lot of that is chamber music. But a lot of the greatest music written, for the stringed instruments is chamber music, trios, quartets, quintets, sextets, octets, it's just phenomenal. And that's something that I hadn't had and that's sort of enough opportunity to explore that I would like to do more of. So I don't feel it's necessarily something that's been sacrificed, but it's something that I can now invest more in, which I'm really excited about. And then spontaneity, I think music is such a spontaneous thing. As I was saying, the moment you go on stage, the moment you decide to play, a piece, from the moment you start, it is totally spontaneous. Of course, you've got the text, and you have to be completely sort of respectful to the, the meter, the intonation, what was written by the composer. But your energy is totally spontaneous, and it should be, because I feel it becomes very music becomes dry and becomes sort of vacuous very quickly when it is totally prescriptive. You just think, I have this, you know, I know exactly how I ought to play this piece, and I must stay within these sort of limits in order to do justice to it. Then it becomes, it doesn't have the fire, the spontaneity that all music needs, because that is its most valuable kind of asset, I feel, is that idea that you are experiencing a journey with a performer as a member of the audience. Right. So I feel that, again, it's a mindset that needs to be constantly refreshed and at the forefront of, certainly I feel that's what I remind myself of every time I play, is that I don't know exactly where I'm going, and I must feel a sense of, you know, not anxiety, but a sense of excitement at what might happen, or what might not happen, you know. But yeah.
Charlie, was it lonely growing up and having to practice and be so focused?
Not really. I mean, again, because it was just something that I wanted to do, and so that was just how it turned out. And I felt, in many ways, I feel very lucky to have had. I mean, I never sort of questioned what I was doing at the time. When I look back, I feel to have had such a kind of, you know, clear, quite binary sense of my existence, you know, that made things quite simple, and that, I think, has been a privilege.
Wonderful. Yeah. Any questions? I thought there's some. Yes, go ahead.
Fellow Curtonian here.
Okay.
Do you think that your experience at Girton shaped your relationship with Cambridge, if it did at all? And do you have any special memories from the college or places that you like to study in particular?
Okay, well, I love Girton. My old sister had been at Girton, so I met Martin Ennis, who was the director of studies there and was the head of the music faculty at the time, and absolutely fell in love with Martin. And he encouraged me to apply, and he said, you know, it'd be a great experience to come here, and you'll have so many opportunities to perform, which was obviously really important to me. And so, yeah, it was the centre of my sort of experience, having known about Cambridge through the sort of eyes of my sister before I came here, who loved Girton, and in many ways was probably more integrated in the kind of social scene of Girton than I actually ever was. Because I was also studying with violinist Sherman Mintz, who was kind of in Europe, and so I was sort of travelling back and forth. I wasn't going to constantly here, so I guess I didn't manage to kind of establish the social life that was that regular necessarily. But I loved Girton. I thought it was a sort of, you know, very Victorian kind of boarding school setup, very very different to the Cambridge colleges in town, which but it was it had its charm, definitely.
There's another question. Yes, please go ahead.
You mentioned a couple times your will to continuously be improving as a musician and growing. How, once you've decided that you want to record a particular piece, how do you decide that it's ready to start, you know, taping?
I think more. I never really feel that I am ready to do it, but I feel if I, you know, feel I've got to be ready, I'll never do anything. So it's more that I see the recording process as another sort of rung on the ladder to be able to improve my insight into a piece. So I never really feel I've absolutely nailed it. Now I know exactly what I'm doing. But I feel recording, performing, all of it is part of a kind of the sort of the process and the kind of fabric of my own sort of journey. And it's not really with the view of having a polished, perfect, you know, finished product. Because that would be it for me, I guess. It's the fact that it is a constant search for something more from the music and from myself. Yeah.
Siem, do you have a question?
Yes, I do have one question. What was your fondest memory from your time in Cambridge?
Oh God, yeah. Well, I mean, maybe it's boring to only mention sort of musical things. I should have some other stories, but I did have an amazing experience, which was I was asked. Stephen Hawking programmed a concert in King's Chapel, and he chose the Wieniawski First Violin Concerto, which is a fiendishly difficult piece, which I'd never played before. And Stephen Cleobury asked if I'd play it, learn it, and play it. And Stephen Hawking was going to be there. And he was there in the front row, and I learned it specifically for this concert. That's amazing. And it was an amazing experience, you know. Obviously, such a kind of legend, you know, as he was. and to then have played this piece, which I then went on to record, and I performed it a number of times, and somehow it really helped sort of lift me up to another level, just working on that piece. So that was definitely a memory from my time there. Yeah.
Yes, 2 questions. We'll take the last 2. Thank you. Go ahead.
I have 2 questions.
Okay, go on.
3 questions.
So the first is, as a child, of course, you start to play the violin, and I guess the first step is to get to know the violin and the technique.
Yeah.
So at which point do you feel like actually I'm discovering myself through the instrument?
I mean, I think it's got that. I think if you approach it from a purely technical, standpoint, it's hard to find a reason, an inspiration to follow through. And so certainly for me, the music, the theme from Beethoven's, the sort of second subject from Beethoven's violin concerto, that was a reason to play the violin. And so in a way, the technical side came later more than initially. I just wanted to make a noise on the violin. I wanted to be able to play a melody because that moved me somehow. And then when you actually discover, when you get into this sort of tradition of the violin, the great violinists and the way their hand, developed a way of playing playing the violin and negotiating your way around the instrument, you then become fascinated by the technique, and it becomes something obsessional that you work at, relentlessly, and you see the rewards you get from working at it. But I think initially the music is the great inspiration, because the dryness of the technique is hard as a starting point, I feel, to kind of, maybe some people, that is enough to get them going. But certainly from my experience, it was the emotional response to the music and the desire to be part of that in some way, to be able to be a sort of player in that scene. And then the technical side, obviously, to be able to do justice to music, you need an element of technique to make a sound, to project a sound, or whatever. But then at the even more elaborate technical side that these violinist composers developed in the 18th and 19th century, that's another world unto itself, which is, equally fascinating and becomes a great motivator to work at the violin.
So the second question, when we take our profession, of course, we are passionate about it.
Yeah.
And hopefully through the process, you show your passion enough for your subject. Gradually also you fulfill your value of yourself, discover who you are, what your identity is.
Yeah.
So how does that apply to your profession?
How you learn about yourself, and you kind of, well, as I was saying before, that idea that you learn what your limitations are, and then you learn that you can actually break through those limitations and expand your kind of horizons. And I think the process of learning the violin, learning an instrument, and the violin in particular, because it is a very difficult instrument to play. When you then put yourself to the test to sort of perform under pressure, and then you sort of come up against all these psychological baggage that you realize you have that you might not have been aware of before, you then have to reckon with that. You have to sort of iron out so many insecurities and doubts, whatever it might be, that stand in your way, to doing something that you can do, but you're stopping yourself from doing it, from these kind of whatever sort of hang-ups you might have. Again, this is my experience, maybe not all violinists, but that's what I've certainly learned from it, is that you really have to learn about yourself and your sort of psychological setup to get the best out of yourself. And it all comes from that more than the ability to do it. And I think that's the most kind of rewarding side of studying and learning about the violin, bringing that to the stage setting that I'm continuing to sort of learn from and sort of learn about myself from.
Marina, go ahead.
Thank you so much for such an incredible performance.
Thank you.
I used to play the violin myself, and I'm a huge fan.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, has the way you practice changed throughout the years? How you approach a new piece, doing all of the techniques?
Definitely, yeah. No, it's. I think the key of practice is, again, it's something, like I was saying, going on stage, you have to completely refresh your idea of what it is every time you go on stage. Practice is the same. You can never have a set way of doing it, because the brain, I guess, like a muscle, if you do the same exercise, then it stops growing. Right. You need to reinvent your concept of practice so that you challenge your brain and kind of, make it feel uncomfortable again, basically. So I feel I've learned that that's the case as I've got older and sort of more experienced. I wasn't even aware of that. So there was a lot of mindless repetition, I feel, when I was younger. Whereas now I'm aware of that, and now the challenge is always finding new ways of stimulating my brain to be more effective in the practice time, and that's a challenge. So good practice is real art form, and I'm constantly managing how I do that. Yeah.
Charlie, if you look back to your younger self,
Yeah.
what advice would you today give your younger self?
To take it easy and not be too kind of self-critical and kind of judgmental towards myself, because I see now, and my perspective has become very much this idea of every situation is somehow tailored to you, and you really have to just walk through that moment. If you put too much pressure on yourself and you're too kind of acidic towards yourself, then that you're just not going to enjoy it as much. You're not going to get as much out of it, but it'll be the same journey. In some ways. And so I think I was very sort of pent up and quite sort of tight in my way of being. So I would really say just take it easy. You're going, and not that I'm completely fatalistic, and I think you just kind of blindly walk forward. But I do feel if you have an ease and a kind of that point of not having expectations necessarily that kind of that limit you, then the path will be that much more kind of enjoyable, meaningful, and you won't kind of create problems for yourself.
Essentially being kinder to yourself.
Definitely be, exactly. Yeah. And let it be the way it's going to be.
Charlie, thank you.
Thank you.
We have had an incredible and very memorable time. Thank you on behalf of all of us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to everybody for joining us this evening. It's been wonderful. Thank you.